Welcome to our first Formula One report of 2025, Friday from the Australian Grand Prix at Albert Park. A street circuit, of course, so the track will pick up grip. Lots of disclaimers, therefore, because the grip will be there as the weekend progresses. Lots of support races in Melbourne as well, Formula 3 and Formula 2, amazingly. And the track temperature very hot today, 42 degrees as well. And a new range of Pirelli compounds. Still, we call them soft, medium and hard, but different in terms of construction and compound formulation. Some teams indeed finding it very difficult to get any increased performance out of the soft tyre, Mercedes and Williams notably. Others talking about an imbalance. Red Bull, no imbalance at all, just no grip. So let's have a look in detail at what happened today, see if there are any pointers that can take us through for the remainder of the weekend. There was no doubt that it was a very, very good day for Ferrari, specifically for Charles Leclerc, who looked like Charles Leclerc should look, really, on top of things. The car wasn't perfect. They tried a few different rear wing setups. You can see in this comparison picture here that Ferrari put out really good. You can see he's running slightly more rear wing than Lewis Hamilton, who was indeed slightly quicker on the straight as a result. So that was good work by Ferrari. Two great drivers, giving them all that feedback. And this is what it looks like with the DRS Open. Quite unusual. We normally only see that in a straight line. But here's Charles going into the very quick S's, where Oliver Baumann had his big moment going in there, coming out of there as a result of what he was doing going in. And you can see he's going in with the DRS Open. So very impressive to see that, how light the car must feel at that point. At the end of the day, Charles Leclerc quickest, not only on the soft tyre, but also in the long runs. Let's have a look at the times. Charles Leclerc, 16.439, you see there on his quickest lap on the soft tyre. Very good lap. He didn't actually get a great first lap when the tyres were at their best. He ran wide, backed out of it, got a bit of traffic, but the second run, a good one. And then 20.8, the only driver to get under the 121 barrier on the long runs. And it was quite a long run too. You can see 12 laps there, and he did the time right at the end, which suggests he's looking after the tyres extremely well too. So that's very worrying, I would say, for everybody else, even for McLaren, who nonetheless were second and third quickest. Lando Norris quickest in FP1. Oscar Piastri slightly quicker in FP2 on the soft tyre. Lando didn't get a great run, got to say that. Lots of mitigating circumstances, as ever at this stage of the weekend. But then Oscar markedly slower than Lando with the long runs. Look at Lando there, 21.466 near the end of his run. Oscar Piastri, 21.8 at the beginning of his run, which suggests again that Lando right on top of how to make the tyres work, how to make this car work when it comes to race simulations and putting road dust on the car. So another very good day for Lando Norris. He'll be thinking about Charles Leclerc. He'll be thinking, right, let's get more performance out of the soft tyre on Saturday in qualifying, see how we get on. Then look at the Visa Cash App team. Yuki Tsunoda, P4. Isaac Hadjar, the rookie, P6, sandwiching Lewis Hamilton in the other Ferrari. Great performance. And look at their workload as well. 16 laps from Yuki Tsunoda on his long run. Very, very impressive day for Yuki Tsunoda, P4. He's been around. We kind of take him for granted a little bit, and there was some chat on our live stream. Will Isaac Hadjar show him up? But here, Yuki Tsunoda, very good job. Well, they've got to say, Isaac Hadjar, 21.9 on the long run. Yuki Tsunoda, 22.3 on the long run. Admittedly, Yuki probably with more fuel because he did a longer run. So a very good day for them. Lewis Hamilton, 16.859. Looked a bit spiky in the car still quite wide entries into the corners. Hasn't settled down into being Lewis Hamilton yet, just finding his way in the team. But not a bad day for him, he will say, 16.859, particularly if he looks at where the Mercedes are and he's thinking, I could be midfield again. At least I'm up there in the sharp edge of the grid at the moment, 16.859. I'm sure that'll continue through to tomorrow. And you can see that 21.2, that puts him quicker than the two McLaren drivers, for example, on the long runs as well. So Lewis will be taking that with him into Saturday. A good performance, confidence building day, I would say, for Lewis Hamilton. Max Verstappen, no grip in the Red Bull. He said afterwards, we've not really ever been very good at Albert Park since they resurfaced it. We found it difficult always to get grip. I think they're probably one of the other teams that didn't get a big improvement out of the soft tyre. They worked on the setup after the soft tyre run and therefore were quite late out for the medium tyre run. By the way, all these tyres, all these runs, the long runs are on the medium tyre, except for the Mercedes, which ran the hard, and Pierre Gasly, which ran the soft for his long run. So yeah, a difficult day for Red Bull. If you've got a good balance, but you're just lacking grip and the lap time, if the driver comes in and says, that felt great, and they're a second off the pace, then you're in trouble. And that's where Red Bull find themselves at the moment, but I guess they'll be thinking we're pretty good at working on the car overnight, and B, the track will probably pick up grip. So we'll see what happens as it gets to the weekend. So Max, let's look at his long run, 21.5. It's a short run, as I say, only eight laps, 21.5. Yeah, you know, not convincing really, is it? It's definitely a lot slower than the Ferraris, kind of just on the edge of where McLaren are if you take the average. But that, of course, means that it's an uphill battle at the moment for Red Bull and Max. Nico Hulkenberg, again, on the single laps, just fabulous. 17.161. in the Sauber-Ferrari, which of course will be an Audi from 26 onwards. The very good first day with the team for Nico Hulkenberg, 17.1 on the soft tyre, right up there with Max Verstappen, 22.0 on the long run, right at the beginning. Looks like they've got a bit of tyre deg there. They need to work more on the long run, doesn't it there? Lance Stroll, quicker than Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin-Mercedes, 17.2, Fernando Alonso, 17.3. So not a good business-like, workman-like day for Lance Stroll, and 22.3 on the long run, 22.4 for Fernando Alonso. So quicker than Fernando in both guises for the car. That's not good for Fernando Alonso, is it? He needs to be hitting the ground running. 2025 is a year when he needs to be able to say, I want to be around for another 2 years to enjoy the Adrian Newey car. But at the moment, right at the beginning, Friday, not a lot. It's right at the beginning of the season, obviously. A good start by Lance Stroll, that's what you got to say. Then Mercedes, who looked pretty good on the medium and the hard tyre, but when they put the soft on, they didn't really go any quicker, as I say. That's a mystery for them. George Russell, 17.2, sort of Lance Stroll time, as you can see. 21.5 on the hard tyre, though, is not a bad performance. Whether the hard actually is an advantage over the medium, it's probably a slightly longer stint going into stint one in the race. But I don't think we should say, oh, well, if he was on the medium, he would have gone half a second a lap quicker. I don't think there was any of that going on. But not a bad day for George Russell, although, as I say, it's enough to make Lewis Hamilton think, yeah, I'm so glad I'm in the Ferrari. Now, speaking of that, what about Carlos Sainz in the Williams-Mercedes? He could have been in the Ferrari. He'll be thinking, yeah, welcome to the midfield, I suppose. He looked very, very quick in FP1. He was second in FP1 to Lando Norris, as he was in the test. And he drove well today, looked really nice in the car. But look at that. Alex Albon had a bit of a brake problem in FP1. Second session, both drivers did exactly the same time to a thousandth of a second. So, yeah, that's either good for Alex Albon or bad for Carlos Sainz, I think. I don't know which way you want to look at it. And then on the long run, Alex Albon quicker than Carlos Sainz on the long run. But he did that time right at the beginning of his run. And Carlos, you could argue, looking after the tyres a little bit more. So very, very even between Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. And Williams-Mercedes in general looking pretty good and reasonably well organised compared with last year. So that was a good start for them, I think, the Friday. Fernando Alonso we've spoken about. Jack Doohan, I thought, did a very good job in the Alpine-Renault. And this, the last year for Renault power units in Formula One, the team switching to Mercedes for 2026. Pierre Gasly not happy with the car. And Jack actually looked pretty much on top of it and quite rhythmic and smooth. Is that the right word? I wouldn't say smooth ever with Jack Doohan, but he looked like he was on top of it, and the car was, he was managing the car the way he wanted to manage it. And yeah, the odd mistake, but looked pretty good in the car, I thought. 17.394, Pierre Gasly 17.4, so he was quicker on the soft tyre. And then Pierre slightly quicker on the long run, but not by much. And bear in mind, Pierre Gasly was on the soft tyre as well, whereas Jack was on the medium. Good bit of comparison work there by Alpine, I thought. Kimi Antonelli in the other Mercedes, 17.6 and then 21.4. George Russell 21.5. So he was slightly quicker on the long run, slower in getting a time out of the soft tyres. So that's obviously an issue for Mercedes. But Antonelli, I thought, also looked very good in the car as well. First time out. It's a big deal for him, obviously, very young. But to be slightly quicker than George on the long run, a very good first day for him. And Liam Lawson struggling in the Red Bull. We saw the lack of grip in the way Liam Lawson was driving it, whereas with Max, you can't really tell unless you're looking at a stopwatch. But with Liam, it was pretty clear there was given the forcefulness of his inputs, and the car was understeering, the back end was coming loose, all sorts of things. It wasn't, you could say it was imbalanced, but that was born of a lack of grip as well. So Liam Lawson really struggling there to make the car work, and therefore overdriving. That is his style. He will. If he doesn't have a lot of grip, he's definitely going to overdrive. 17.6 for Liam Lawson, 22.7 on the long run, a long way from Max Verstappen. Gabriele Bortoleto in the other Sauber 17.8, 23.0. Not a lot to say about that other than that it's a long way away from Nico Hulkenberg. I think that probably just shows how good a job Nico Hulkenberg is doing now, because Bortoleto is not slow by any means. And the worst team of the weekend so far, oddly, Haas, who had such a good 2025. Esteban Ocon, not impressive in terms of grip and balance and trying to get the best from the car, but way off the pace at the moment for them, which is surprising considering how good they were, as I say. And Oliver Behrman went off in FP1, the very, very fast S's towards the end of the lap. And that was a function of the way he drives. He's one of these very wide entry, leans on the car going in. And he did that going into the very fast entry to these S's, the left-hander, and left himself no room at all for change of direction mid-corner, which is what a Charles or a Max or a Lewis, if Lewis is Lewis, will do beautifully as the weekend picks up. That's very important to get the car absolutely straight before you start loading it for the right-hander there. And you could see in the way Oliver went into that corner, he went in, all the emphasis was on the left-hander. And he came out of the left-hander a little bit too quick, and then he had absolutely no ability to get the thing changed direction for the right-hander, ran out of road. And then it looked like he was keeping it straight on the gravel, and then the thing just pitched left, and then he hit the guardrail backwards. Well, not backwards, it spun round and took the right rear off the car and, yeah, brought out the red flag. So not a good start for Oliver Behrman, who was going into FP1 thinking, yeah, I'll let the track come to me. It always picks up grip here, won't push too hard too soon. And he felt that's what he was doing, but it just shows that, you know, some of these young guys, the adrenaline pumps, and it all gets away from them. So, yeah, an interesting first day, I think. Very good day for Ferrari. A lot of people are still saying, Lando Norris is going to walk it. McLaren have a massive advantage. Well, interesting, isn't it? Charles Leclerc looks superb today. Light fuel, heavy fuel, and in terms of just being on top of the car and getting it well set up for the weekend. Anyway, as I say, it is the weekend that's going to be the key part. Albert Park does change from Friday to Saturday and then Saturday to Sunday. Let's see what happens then. Looking forward to that. See you soon. Another disclaimer at the beginning of this section, because it could well be wet race day on Sunday. Hard to believe with incredibly nice weather Friday, Saturday, hot track temperatures too, around the 40 degrees, but big forecast for rain on Sunday. Guess who'll be rubbing his hands with glee there? Max Verstappen, who qualified third in the Red Bull, beaten really by just more grip in the two McLarens, and very good job by both McLaren drivers. Good job by Max, of course, to be P3 in that Red Bull ahead of the Ferraris and the Mercedes. And guess who won't be so happy that it's going to be raining? And that is Lando Norris on the pole, just from his teammate Oscar Piastri. Lando would want nothing more than just a nice dry race, take the lead from the start, have no problem with his teammate going into turn 1 or turn 2, or turn 3 for that matter, and then just win the race. But it's going to be more difficult, obviously, in the wet. He needs to make sure he's the guy with the clear view of the road in front. And he's got Oscar Piastri, the guy that caused him so much trouble at Monza in a similar situation. And look at the context now. Oscar's just re-signed for McLaren, very relaxed, very confident, earning big money now. Big star in Australia, lots of attention. First Australian potentially to win the Australian Grand Prix since Alan Jones did so in a Williams all those years ago. So it won't be easy for him if Zach Brown is saying to him on Saturday night, which I'm sure he is, look, we can't have a repeat of Monza. What nearly went wrong at the second chicane at Monza. We've got to make this a clean race for McLaren. If Lando leads off the line, you're going to have to let him go and sit there and wait and see what happens. Not an easy thing for Oscar Piastri. He could do that in most races. This is the Australian Grand Prix. He's a young Australian. Every Australian journalist, can you win this race, Oscar? Can you win this race? A different sort of pressure for him. So it'll be really interesting to see how he handles it, and indeed how Lando handles it, and indeed what happens off the line, particularly if it's wet. All bets are off, of course, because where the grip will be if it's wet is very much a question mark. I guess they'll be trying to find that out when they go out on the reconnaissance laps from the pit lane onto the grid. But it's going to be a toss of the coin in many ways. And Lando Norris, of course, in the best position, being on the pole. but pressure on him in a way, because it's absolutely critical that he develops that pole into a race lead on lap 1 and then pulls away. Anyway, that's for tomorrow. Let's have a look at what happened in qualifying. It was Max Verstappen. For a start, the Red Bull a lot better today, as predicted, with the track picking up grip. Red Bull very good at finding grip in the car. Mysteriously, how they do that, no idea. Cambers, toe in, whatever, lowering, raising, getting the balance a little bit better, whatever. They got it right, and Max very quick in FP3. And in qualifying, he was quickest for a while in Q3, easily sailed through into Q3. But then on the last lap, when both McLarens got it absolutely right, it was a matter of 3 or 4 tenths of a second. And that all happened in the last sector. And there's no real difference between, say, Sector 1 and Sector 3 in Melbourne. It's all about tight corners, all about breaking into tight corners and traction, turn in. And Max, it should be pointed out, was really, really quick in Sector 1 on his fastest lap in Melbourne. He was right up there with Lando, ahead of Oscar Piastri in what he was doing with the Red Bull through Sector 1. Sector 2, he was quickest of all. It all went away for him in Sector 3, and that can only be because the tyres started to go away. He was just putting so much energy through the tyres. McLaren using its tyres better than the Red Bull, and they still had lots of grip. Well, in the hands of Lando Norris, still had lots of grip in Sector 3, and that's where the big difference was between McLaren and Red Bull. And that won't, of course, be a factor if it's wet tomorrow. That's a completely different story. And what qualifying showed us, I think, from the Red Bull Max Verstappen perspective, is that he has a drivable car that should, in theory, be very good in the rain as well, and give Max the sort of tool that he needs to do what we know he can do in the wet. I'm not making this a Max Verstappen bias video by any means, but he was the nearest to McLaren, and I just wanted to highlight the difference between the grip level that McLaren have and Red Bull. There's another way of doing it, of course, and that is to show the speed trap. It's a bit misleading around Melbourne, speed trap, because the speed trap's just before the braking area into turn 1 after the start-finish line. Not the fastest part of the circuit, which is around the back, but they're kind of turning a little bit there. They call that intermediate 2. So it's not totally related to speed through the air, as, for example, it would be at Monza down the back straight out of the Ascari chicane. Anyway, let's have a look at the speed trap, which is after the start-finish line. They're in terminal velocity. They're in 8th gear. George Russell in the Mercedes 335. Maybe a toe involved there or not. If not, Mercedes really quick. But Antonelli, of course, not quick at all through there. This is in qualifying. But then look at the Red Bulls, 331, 330, Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen. And look where Lando Norris is, 326, and Oscar Piastri, 326. So that is just downforce. That's the amount of downforce McLaren carry and the drag that it induces compared with Red Bull. A rather strange one there are Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton 329, so yeah, less downforce than the McLarens, but more probably than Mercedes. But look at Charles Leclerc, obviously carrying quite a lot of wing today, 325 in the Ferrari, but he wasn't that quick in qualifying today. We'll get onto that in a second. It's all a bit strange, all of this, but I think the big factor there is how slow the McLarens are through the air in a straight line, which just is an indication of how much downforce they have. Now let's have a look at that brilliant lap by Lando Norris. I say brilliant because Lando was under pressure. In his first run in Q3, he ran wide coming out of turn 4, and that lap was deleted. It was no big deal. It was a 15.9, but of course that meant that he was P10 unless he did the job on the last lap. And he had to really find that balance between pushing hard enough to beat his teammate, Oscar Piastri, and equally making no more mistakes. And that's what he did absolutely beautifully. And he basically beat his teammate. I say beat, I mean, we're talking tiny, tiny fractions here. But I think he got ahead of his teammate the way he began his lap. In the last 3 or 4 corners going into the flying lap, he was anything between 7 and 3 kilometers an hour quicker at various points of that last section than his teammate Oscar Piastri, getting the tyres a little bit hotter, which meant that he just had a perfect setup going into Sector 1, and that is where he found his advantage over Oscar Piastri. After that, he was kind of there or thereabouts with Oscar, but Sector 1 was where he did it. And it wasn't through breaking into turn 1 with these tyres that were nicely up to temperature. Actually, he braked earlier than Oscar going through there, but he was really quick on exit and then got a very, very good run down to turn 3. There's that straight down to the tight right-hander. And that is where Lando Norris was absolutely superb today. perfect in the way he applied the brakes, perfect in terms of his approach to the corner. Still wide, but very, very smooth and svelte in everything he did, the brakes, the throttle. And at one point, when Oscar was braking 7th, about 200 kilometers an hour, Lando at exactly the same place was still in 8th. So he had that confidence. The tyres were perfect. And of course, that then gave him a big advantage in the straight that followed. So that was Lando Norris at his best. On this occasion, it wasn't a corner where he could come out of the brakes and throttle and just let the car float. It was just perfect use, perfect judgment of high-speed braking. And yeah, we've never really talked about that with Lando. But of course, he's very, very good in that area. And it's not just a question of how late he can brake, it's how he brakes. And you get and when you watch Oscar Piastri braking at high speed, you still get the feeling that he's braking a little bit more harshly than Lando. You can see the car moving a little bit. Well, with Lando, a little bit like Fernando Alonso at his peak, everything is just perfectly in harmony and lovely to watch. And just a great lap under pressure. To drive that pole lap under that sort of pressure, having had your first lap deleted, is, well, it just shows that he is capable of winning the World Championship this year. There's no doubt about that at all. Watching Lando, and I speak now of a guy that's been around quite a long time, watching Lando in harmony with the McLaren, and I guess this is nothing but coincidence, it's very reminiscent of the way James Hunt was with the McLaren back in '76. It was just like the team, everything around him was just perfect for him, and the car was perfect. And it looks that way. Just get the same feeling. Watching him today, I was thinking, yeah, it's James Hunt in the McLaren, just in his championship year. It looked really, really good. So Oscar Piastri had a real chance to get the pole today. As I say, you know, the Australian star, lots of focus on him, big opportunity, fabulous race car. Lando making that mistake on his first run. It's kind of surprising. I think that Oscar then didn't get the pole, and you could say that if he's going to go on to beat Lando Norris this year to the championship, if there's a championship to be won by McLaren, which it looks as if there is, then this was a moment when he should have come up and taken the pole there. And it was only, I think, he just didn't get the tyres warm enough going into the lap. That may be just a driver thing. It may be an engineer thing that told him to cool it a little bit going up, maybe because he's a bit harder on the tyres anyway. They wanted the tyres a little bit cooler at the beginning of the lap. And then it was just basically braking a little bit later than Lando, apart from turn 4, where Lando just had him completely. And of course, if you think about it, turn 4 is a really important corner at Melbourne, because there's a long straight leading into it and there's a long straight leading after it. And that's where Lando did it. It was multiplying how well he was in the middle of the corner with how well he braked the car into the corner, and then of course benefited from the acceleration run out of the corner. And it hurt Oscar in all 3 areas. So it looks today as if Lando has another thing that he does very well. And this comes under the heading of just being so smooth and so soft with his touch with the car. It is how well he brakes at high speed. Just brilliant to watch today. I've used that word twice now, but I can't think of another word. Dazzling maybe is a better word. And Oscar is just slightly harsher. And therein lies the difference. So it'll be fascinating tomorrow, I think, in the wet, to see how Oscar drives this race, because he has a chance. You know, if he sees himself, which I'm sure he does, as a really natural talent, then he'll be thinking, yeah, the wet's going to give me an opportunity now to beat Lando, and see how we get on. And then there's Max behind him as well. So, you know, there we go. And just to reiterate, Max really, really good today. Got the absolute 100% from the Red Bull, and was, as I say, a Lando match. Slightly ahead of Lando, really, for the first 2 sectors, and then he just lost the tyres in the 3rd sector. George Russell did a good job, scratched around P4 in the Mercedes. It's about where he should be, I think. You can, if you watch Lando versus George now, you can really see how different they are with their inputs. George has definitely got that sort of slightly Alonso-esque movement on the steering wheel, which Lando doesn't have, and that's George. You know, that's the way he drives. Just has to feel that, and he did a good job. Did a very good job. P4 in the Mercedes, so they're there. They're definitely in the running in a wet race tomorrow for a great result. The big surprise to me was how slow Ferrari were today, particularly Charles Leclerc. You can say, you know, Lewis on a learning curve. Bear in mind that in terms of qualifying overall, Charles Leclerc qualified 7th, Lewis 8th. And it was very close. And you could say, well, that's a pretty good result for Lewis. A bit disappointing for Charles, 7th and 8th. But look at this. This is Leclerc versus Hamilton in qualifying. Sector 1, Lewis's best from all 3 sessions. You've got to remember here that doesn't reflect the lap time they did in Q3, finally in Q3. That's the best they did throughout qualifying. Lewis 26-1, Charles Leclerc 26-1. Very similar Sector 1. Sector 2, Lewis 17-0, Charles 17-0. Sector 3, Lewis 0.2 quicker. Then in the intermediate, which is the back straight, more terminal velocity, I think, than the speed trap, Lewis 4 kilometers an hour quicker than Charles Leclerc. And then in the speed trap, which is braking into turn 1, just before the braking area into turn 1, Charles a little bit quicker than Lewis. So what does all this mean? This means, I suppose it means it's very good news for Lewis Hamilton. He just didn't string it all together in one lap because he was basically quicker than Charles Leclerc in all 3 sectors today. So what happened to Charles Leclerc? No explanation at the moment. Looks like the car is, I mean, you could look at the speed through the air at I2 on the back straight there, 325, and you can say, wow, his engines are probably gone off, or something's wrong, he's running too much wing or something. But then again, you look at the speed trap, and he's actually quicker than Lewis. So probably Charles Leclerc's a bit mystified by it. It looks to me like it was a day when Charles didn't feel as if he had the right tire temperatures and just didn't feel he had the right grip. But look at that. You know, that's it. For anyone wondering about how Lewis Hamilton's going at Ferrari, actually today he was quicker than Charles Leclerc, first time out in the Ferrari. Just didn't show in the lap time because he didn't do it all in one lap. But, you know, interesting, isn't it? So let's have a look at qualifying then, overall, just talk through it. So McLaren on the front row, really good job by Lando, as I say. Oscar Piastri just behind him. Max, excellent third. George Russell fourth. Yuki Tsunoda parlaying what he did yesterday into a great result for the team today in P5. Got a little bit of a toe, but that didn't really add up to too much. He was just very good everywhere. And just a mature racing driver, even though he's an incredibly young, still ebullient Japanese driver. And just what a job he's doing with that team. And the team itself looking great. Alan Permain coming on strong. I feel a bit sorry for Jody Eggington, who, the technical director, who's just been, I don't know if he's been replaced, moved sideways, or decided that he doesn't want the hassle of racing. He's moved into Red Bull technology now, away from that role in the team. But wow, what a job they've done over the winter, and what a great car they have now. Really, really good performance from Yuki Tsunoda. Alex Albon's 15.7, excellent as well in the Williams-Mercedes, looking really strong there. And Carlos Sainz 16.0, suddenly looking a little bit spiky alongside Alex Albon, who I've always said has this lovely soft touch, bit like Lando, different in other ways, but has that beautiful inputs, seamless inputs that he has. And in a good car, he's looking really good. I'm sure a lot of people say, oh, well, this is just Carlos Sainz pushing him on or whatever. But to me, he's always been that good. And it's just a sign that it is a very good car. And Carlos, looked very good yesterday. I think today he was just a bit spiky in everything he did. I don't know why. Maybe he was a bit overconfident. We've seen Carlos do that before. For sure, he'll be disappointed to be slower than Alex. But at the same time, it is a new team. So there's a lot for him to be looking forward to as we go on. Charles Leclerc and then Lewis in the weird Ferrari performance today. And look at that, 0.2 quicker by the end. Charles quicker than Lewis. And Lewis actually spun at the end of Q2 on scrub tyres, harmlessly, and did a sort of, slight burnout to get back in the track again. And in so doing, brought out the yellows, and anyone around obviously then suffered. And particularly Jack Doohan, who was doing a very good job in the second Alpine, had to back off. That was an example of how Lewis has been a bit irascible in the car, not in his personality, all weekend, and not able to string together one lap. And he still doesn't look to be the Lewis of old in terms of getting into the corner early and all these inputs. Around the last sector, he looks quite good. Sector 1, though, he still looks pretty edgy. Pierre Gasly, great job. Again, I keep talking about how good Pierre Gasly is to get the Alpine-Renault up there into Q3. Very, very good performance. And then a bit further down the grid, Isaac Hadjar in the other Racing Bulls 16.1. didn't get through to Q3. We're starting to see too that he is quite long corners. I was wrong about that. I thought he was one of the guys that can get into the corner quite early and do quite an economic job. But he looks to be like a lot of these rookies now, who are just leaning on the car, very wide entries. And we saw a lot of that today. I mean, Oliver Bowman on his first flying lap with the car rebuilt from yesterday in FP3 this morning, did one of these things, very wide approach, caught an edge on the left and went straight off. And car was beached and didn't get it back. And then the gearbox failed at the beginning of qualifying, probably as a result of that, or some foreign material in there, I would imagine, something like that. So it was just leaning on the car with very wide entries. We saw a lot of that going on. Carlos Sainz did that. Liam Lawson had a moment as a result of that, and so did Kimi Antonelli. Antonelli is a weird guy to watch because he definitely has a feel for short corners, and you can see moments at the back end of sector 3 when he's looking pretty neat and compact. But his problem seems to be the fast corners and how vicious he is with the car. Confident, I guess you call it, but I call it vicious. Just vicious with the car. Change of direction and high speed. I mean, he's just flicking it from side to side in a way that a guy who has a feel for short corners normally would never do. I mean, if you look at the way Max drives through the fast sections at Melbourne, you can just see the car. It's not on a piece of string. It's not just perfect like that. You can see he's positioning the car, but everything is done with incredible touch. But with Antonelli, it's unbelievable how vicious his movements are on high speed, but they're not at slow speed. I've never seen that before with a driver. I just can't imagine. I mean, either he's getting conflicting information and advice on how to drive the car. On the one hand, George saying, yeah, throw the car here, throw the car there, the way George does. And then he's just letting him get on with it in the slow corners. Or they're saying, that's the way to drive the car. You know, you got to really get on top of it and see it coming from the engineering side. I don't know what it is, but it's a really strange combination that Antonelli has of looking on slow corners as if he really knows what he's doing, and then fast corners, it's whoa, stand back. Who else? Yeah, the other Haas, Esteban Ocon, was ridiculously slow. I don't know what their problem is. They had very good last year, so it's strange that they can't continue. Aston Martin looked a bit better than they did yesterday. Fernando Alonso just ahead of Lance Stroll, but it was close. Look at that, 16.2, 16.3. You don't want to see Fernando 2 or 3 tenths minimum ahead of Lance Stroll at this stage of his career. But Lance Stroll, not looking too bad, I suppose, and he's not too bad in the wet either, so I'm interested to see how he goes in the wet tomorrow. And we'll be back again tomorrow, of course, with another vid to tell you how that goes. Looking forward to that. In the meantime, take care. See you soon. And so the drama began in Melbourne. The Formula 2 race was cancelled because of the heavy rain. The Formula 1 grid assembled with drizzle, and then the drizzle went away, but everybody was on intermediates. Well, Lance Stroll initially opted for full wets, but then he too switched to intermediates just before the formation lap. On the formation lap, it was greasy, it was slippery, particularly on the curbs, particularly on the white lines. It caught out Isaac Hadjar in the second Racing Bulls. He crashed into the Tech Pro barrier, not to restart, actually reduced to tears, such was his frustration. But it was quite a vicious move he was making on the steering at that specific moment. So he will look at that in slow-mo, and I guess he'll look at the way Lando and Max and a few others were doing that formation lap. Of course, that delayed the start, but nonetheless, conditions more or less the same when the start proper was given, and it was Lando Norris protecting that pole position. Beautiful start from the pole. Great start too from Oscar Piastri alongside him in the other McLaren, and good start too from Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. So Lando needed to have done that. He did it beautifully. Max had the run going towards the braking area into turn 1, started to move towards the inside. Lando had to move left to protect that position. Wasn't a big deal, but it was enough to leave the door open for Oscar Piastri. If he wanted to make a dive down the inside, this was the moment he was going to do it. But he didn't. He didn't do a Hungary. He didn't do a Monza. He gave the corner to Lando Norris correctly, obviously. But in so doing, of course, he lost a little bit of momentum. He hugged the inside going into turn 1, hugged the inside going into turn 2. And Max Verstappen on the outside of turn 2, where it was wet, just blew past Oscar Piastri on the outside to take P2 on the run down into turn 3. the pass of the race for sure, on the outside of the wet of Oscar Piastri. Anyway, they get to the braking area for turn 3. This is the best part of the road for Lando Norris, and he was absolutely pin sharp perfect through there on that opening lap. But behind him, mayhem, because Jack Doohan had gone off in the Alpine. He touched a white line on the straight and it just lost the rear and it flicked round, got into an aquaplane and hit the Tech Pro barriers. He was okay, but that brought out the first of the afternoon safety cars. So now we had a safety car procession with Lando Norris and Max Verstappen between the two McLarens, a somewhat different situation to qualifying already. And I guess many people were saying, can Max win this race? Can he do it? Can he do it? Of course, it kind of depended on what was going to happen with the weather. At this point, there was no real threat of heavy rain. Indeed, it was getting lighter and lighter. And the intermediates, after about 4 or 5 laps, were starting to overheat. Lando and Max both having to go into wet parts of the road in order to protect them. Anyway, at the restart, Lando again did a great job. Max tried to push him quite hard early on, but then it was very clear that his tyres were going off quicker than those of the two McLarens. Oscar Piastri pulled right up behind Max and eventually forced Max into an error. With the tyres going off on the Red Bull, he locked up going into a tight right-hander towards the end of the lap, and Oscar Piastri took then second place back from Max. Max was then on his own under no pressure at all from George Russell in the Mercedes, who was some 8 seconds behind him. But now it was Lando Norris versus Oscar Piastri. And here we saw a really clear indication of where Oscar Piastri is with his driving. They were very close. It was relatively easy for Oscar to pull up behind Lando Norris because Lando was going as slowly as he wanted to go in order to stay in front, obviously in the lead, and that was Oscar's marker, so he could catch him just about everywhere. But he was doing so with wide entries, with late braking, with all the things that we saw from Oscar Piastri at the back end of last year. So the news is he hasn't gone back to his short corner, very compact way of driving that we saw early in his McLaren career. He's now effectively driving exactly the same way as Lando Norris, except that, of course, Lando is a little bit softer with his inputs and makes fewer mistakes as a result, and he's massaging the car a little bit more. But in terms of the way they approach the corner, where they're putting the power down, pretty much spot on, identical now. So in this situation, if this continues for the year, no doubt at all, Lando Norris is going to easily beat Oscar Piastri because he's going to make fewer mistakes and he's softer with his inputs all round. The only way Oscar was ever going to do anything with Lando would be if he could start to go back to being a real short corner driver and doing something different, particularly on the slower medium speed corners. And there is one other point to make, which is that you would have imagined when Oscar was behind Max in the opening phase of the race that he would have been thinking, oh yeah, this is how Max drives. I've forgotten to do that, or something along those lines. But it didn't do that. And then that's partly because Max wasn't actually using short corners in the early laps of the race any more than anybody else was. Very difficult to do that when it's a drying groove and you just got to be on the dry groove that is there from all the race cars. So what Max was using in that early phase of the race, like Lando, was his incredibly soft touch and feel. And that was what, of course, is very difficult to see if you're following another car or indeed watching it on television or anywhere else. All you're seeing is a car that isn't twitchy, that other drivers are finding twitchy. So that was why Oscar probably didn't change anything and is still the driver that he was in qualifying, which is, a Lando Norris clone, but without Lando's softness of touch. So Lando Norris, under pressure from Oscar Piastri, looked absolutely calm and totally in control, driving beautifully. And of course, there was real pressure on Lando because the radio messaging from the McLaren pit bull was typically confusing. First, Oscar was told to take it easy and be careful and not to push Lando when the track admittedly was still wet and it was just a very small dry groove. Fair enough in many ways to have given that instruction. And then subsequently that was followed up with, Oscar, you're free to race. So this was a lot of pressure building up on Lando. It's a bit like Christian Horner saying, race one another, but don't get too close. Anyway, Oscar was doing a good job there, putting pressure on Lando. The crowd were going wild. But then on lap 34, it all changed because that's when Fernando Alonso, of all people, twice world champion, very experienced driver, lost the Aston Martin, hit the wall, brought out the safety car. And at this point, the rain had stopped. The intermediate tyres were going off. So everybody barreled in either for medium slicks or hard slicks. Medium in the case of the Red Bulls, Max Verstappen. Hard in the case of McLaren, Mercedes and Ferrari. The safety car was out for quite a long time, 4 laps indeed, And when it pulled in, very, very dark clouds were already over the circuit again. They were all on slicks now, but quite clearly some heavy rain was on the way. And sure enough, 2 laps later on lap 44, both McLarens had a major drama at the third last corner of the lap. The tight right-hander at the end of with the fast approach. First of all, Lando in the lead, ran wide, kept it together beautifully and managed to get it on track with a little bit of oversteer on the grass, but managed to get back on. Obviously a bit sheepish at this point, came out of the throttle. Oscar saw that, but he then too ran wide. Maybe he lost concentration as a result of seeing Lando make that mistake, but it was a much bigger drama for Oscar because he lost it on that right-hander and then kept his foot in it to the point where he then lost it going into the tight left, the second last corner of the lap. Very, very tight left-hander, ran wide onto the grass and was beached on the grass for far too long, enough to drop him way down the field. Eventually managed to reverse himself out with the wheels massively spinning and got back on track. But that was effectively the end of Oscar Piastri's challenge on slicks in the wet. Lando Norris pulled straight into the pit lane and went back onto intermediates. Max Verstappen did likewise. So now we had a restart behind the safety car of Lando leading Max, leading George Russell, Alex Albon, and then Kimi Antonelli, who's going very well in the Mercedes. As I said yesterday, this amongst all the rookies is the driver that does have a soft touch in terms of being able to create short corners on slow and medium speed turns, and he did that really well in the wet. I said yesterday that he's very, very aggressive with his inputs on fast corners, but of course that wasn't really an issue. He did have a spin coming out of a left-hander, quite a quick left-hander by the cricket club there. But overall, this wasn't a massive issue in this race on intermediate because everybody was kind of line locked on the drying line on intermediates through the faster corners. So he was basically doing what everybody else did on those corners and then making up ground. More importantly, he wasn't filling the car with spiky inputs that suddenly caused the back end to go or the front to go, as a lot of other drivers were complaining about. Car was very skittish. With a driver like Antonelli and a driver like Max, driver to some extent like Lando, given his inputs. So anyway, getting back to the front of the race, it was now Lando Norris from Max Verstappen, and it was close, very close. Max got within DRS range of Lando in the closing laps. It was all over him on the last lap, but could do nothing. And crossed the line only 0.8 of a second behind Lando to finish second. But Lando, of course, to win the opening round of the World Championship, very deservedly so, from the pole. Absolutely stunning drive. Just that one mistake when he ran wide on slicks in the wet, but we'll forgive him for that one. Otherwise, he really showed it to Oscar Piastri, and that was the key takeaway from this race. George Russell, a lonely third in the factory Mercedes, tried to give Max a bit of a push at the final restart when they're all back on slicks again. He's on the hard tyre, Max is on the medium, but Max again started to pull away. It was a little bit like the way Max pulled away initially from Oscar Piastri in the opening laps of the race. Oscar would have a jink here, a jink there, would just move the car a little bit when Max wasn't, and it was enough to give Max maybe 0.05 and then 0.1, 0.2. That was the difference. Very small differences, and it was a little bit the same between Max and George. George really good through the first couple of corners, but then over the lap, there would be a slight mistake and Max would get away from him. Anyway, good drive by George. Very good drive by George to finish third. Kimi Antonelli, really good drive to finish behind George, effectively in P4 on the road. Excellent debut by him for the reasons I've already stated. He was temporarily demoted to P5 as a result of what seemed to be an unsafe pit release by Mercedes, but the FIA then rescinded that decision, so he did get P4 in the end, and he deserved that too. Another driver who drove extremely well was Alex Albon in the Williams Mercedes, kept the car on the fairway all afternoon. Carlos Sainz unlucky on what was effectively the slow lap behind the safety car once the Jack Doohan accident had happened. Towards the end of that lap, Carlos had a problem with an upshift in the safety car mode and just caught the rear and flicked him into the Tech Pro barriers just before the pit lane. So very unfortunate afternoon for Carlos. But nonetheless, a very, very good drive by Alex Albon and Williams with P5. And Lance Stroll drove very well to finish P6 for Aston Martin. Again, on a day when normally you'd expect him to be getting involved with quite a lot of drama, he too absolutely out there, making no mistakes and just bringing the car home. Very, very good drive into P6 on a day, as I say, when his very experienced double world champion teammate put it in the wall. After being caught up by some gravel online on a quick corner, inevitably one of the variables of racing in these conditions. Nico Hulkenberg, excellent in P7 after a disappointing qualifying for Sauber. Classic Nico Hulkenberg race drive. I did give him a bit of a hard time in a live stream recently, saying he wasn't that good in the last 20, 30 laps of the race. But on this occasion, just fabulous. What a great race drive by Nico Hulkenberg. So I take all that back, Nico. Beautiful drive. And he finished ahead of the two Ferraris, Charles Leclerc ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Really disappointing performance from both of those. And eventually, Oscar Piastri caught Lewis on the last lap and passed him on the outside of the 9-10, very fast sector in the wet. Given their poor track position, I can understand why Ferrari would have kept them out for an extra lap before switching them back onto intermediates. They did lose a lot of time, but it was a gamble worth taking. I think they'll get a lot of criticism, probably in the Italian press, probably in the press in general, for that decision. It'll come under the heading of poor strategy again. But if you are suffering, you always take the gamble like that. Maybe the rain could have eased. Maybe it could have been the call of the century. But they made that judgment call. The reality is they shouldn't have been so far back anyway. They shouldn't have been in a position to have to take that gamble. Alpine took a similar decision for Pierre Gasly and Racing Bulls for Yuki Tsunoda. In Pierre's case, you can kind of understand it because I guess they were thinking of Brazil last year and how they picked up track position big time there. So that was unfortunate for Pierre. Less understandable for Yuki Tsunoda, who'd been so quick all weekend. So a very disappointing ending of the race for him. And there's a lot of weird radio transmissions going on with Ferrari as well, almost becoming uncomfortable, with Charles Leclerc giving his engineer a hard time for saying the water that you're feeling in the cockpit, by which he meant must be from the water bottle, but he didn't say all that. And then Charles said, well, yeah, thanks for stating the obvious. I know that'll go viral and everybody will think it's very funny, but I don't think it's particularly funny in the middle of a race when an engineer quite clearly is trying to help the driver. Anyway, that was that. And then on the Lewis side, they were giving Lewis quite a lot of instructions on how to try to get past Alex Albon to do with the DRS and various switches. And he kept saying, I can handle it, I can handle it. Well, Lewis, you didn't handle it, and you never got past Alex Albon. And I think for a Ferrari driver to get beaten, admittedly in his first Grand Prix, for him to get outraced by Alex Albon in a Williams is a bit embarrassing, to be honest. And I was a bit surprised that Lewis was taking that rather dogmatic approach on the radio, because I'm sure on the pit wall they were thinking, what is going on here? Why can't he get past him? Pierre Gasly finished 11th. Sad for him to be out of the points. Did a good job all weekend. And Oliver Berman, amazingly, kept it on the island and actually finished on the road. He passed quite a lot of cars, but he passed cars when he was unlapping himself when the safety car came out. But he kept more or less pace with Esteban Ocon, his teammate at Haas Ferrari. But a terrible weekend for Haas. But a great weekend, as we say, for Lando Norris. What a way to start his 2025 campaign. I love saying that because it sounds like, yeah, the campaign has started and Lando's on the go. And yeah, just beautiful. Hugged his mum and dad when he got out of the car. Different finishing procedure in Parc Fermé now. Nice to see the winner drive into the garage, and we don't have the green room stuff. And it's a little bit more organised. And yeah, really nice moment when Lando got out of the car. None of the fist pumping, jumping around, just calmly got out, shook hands with Max. Max and George shook hands as well. Good to see. Well, they did something. They rubbed shoulders, I think, something like that. And yeah, very good all round. Oscar Piastri will be feeling sick as a dog, I suspect, because this was his moment and it's gone now. So, and Lando not only won the Australian Grand Prix, but he's won a big initial battle, not even a skirmish, a big battle with Oscar Piastri as to who is going to get, if there's going to be a world champion at McLaren, who it's going to be. And it's not only because he won the race, but because of the way he won the race, his faultless driving, or apart from that one mistake, and the way he got the pole as well. And that's a lot for Piastri to take and try to react to and come back ahead of Lando. Almost impossible now, I think. And we can watch more of it in the Chinese Grand Prix coming up this weekend. It's a sprint weekend as well, unfortunately, but nonetheless, it is the Chinese Grand Prix, so bring it on. See you then. Big thanks to our partners on our YouTube channel and on our podcast platforms, to Jetcraft, the world's largest buyer and seller of executive jets, to OEM Exclusive, passionate suppliers of OEM upgrades for exotic and high-performance vehicles, and to Track Ninja, a lap timer and data app designed to help users improve their on-track car and driver performance through analysis and an innovative data garage. Watch out too for the first edition of Grande Épreuve, your quarterly Formula One super slick magazine, brought to you by OscarRacer.com.au.